all messed up because I was in a truck stop and I didn't know what was happening, of Social Selling 2.0. I'm Tom Burton. We're here with Brandon Lee and Carson. We have the full team here today and yet another awesome guest, Morgan Ingram. Morgan, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So we're going to talk today about advancing the buyer journey through videos and events and just different ways of doing the buyer journey. But before we do that, because we have Carson back today, and we missed you the last couple weeks, Carson. In fact, the show, I just wouldn't even try to replicate the dad joke challenge. So anyway, we're back. We're back, and
we have a really low bar. So
we have a low bar.
Low bar. You have to think.
Right. Low bar. Well, hey, Tom, before we get going, Bob Ritton said aloha, which, man, maybe he's in Hawaii today and not Texas. But everybody else, whether you're on the podcast, thank you for joining us. If you're on the live show, love to hear in the comments, who are you, where are you from? And then just invite you to ask questions. Like, this is the four of us having a conversation, but we want to include you all. So as you know, any questions you ask, we try to get as many of them up on screen as possible and start talking about them. So you guys make the show. So please, please, please jump in with the comments.
Yep, absolutely. And Butch, welcome from Atlanta. All right, Carson. Oh, Butch is already betting on Morgan.
I know, but
that's a safe bet.
That's his confidence. His confidence level in us.
I don't know what we're betting on, but like, all right.
See, we're just better off being silent, Morgan. You and
I. Brandon and me, right?
All right. Carson, since you're back and we're happy to have you, go ahead and start.
I'll lead us off. So I did not ask ChatGPT this week because they're kind of on a losing streak. So this week I ran across this one this past week, and I thought I'd use it on the show. So why don't people laugh loudly in Hawaii? Because you typically hear aloha.
Oh, wow. What did you do? You teed up Bob for that? Did you guys?
You know what? That was totally ironic that Bob is leading off with aloha today. So he's not laughing loudly, I'll tell you that.
No, I don't even know if he has aloha going on with that one, but
probably not. That's a low.
All right. Well, I did not ask ChatGPT either. I consulted with my library of dad jokes on my phone, and I went this route. What do you call potatoes that do yoga? Meditators.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my goodness.
That's a hair above.
Morgan, do you want to vote?
I don't even. None of them were like inherently ahead of the other.
Yeah,
I think they're in the same bucket.
Which translations mean they both sucked.
Like it wasn't it. That wasn't it.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's just get to the meat.
Yeah. I'm going to vote. Yeah, Brandon by a nose. Oh, interesting. All right.
Yeah, it's like it's like a fourth in inches. It's like we had to. It's like an inch.
All right.
Yeah. It's bad when we got a boo from Bob. Yeah, that's we may have to rethink the dad joke challenge moving into season 2.
I think so. I'm ready to dump it.
All right. Yeah. All right. Well, here we go. Well, welcome.
Let's get to the good part.
I just wanted to welcome Klaus from Toronto and the nice words as well. And we also have Patricia, who's in Missouri, but used to be in Hawaii. So,
hey, all hail Hawaii. Missouri.
All right. So, Morgan, I'm glad you stayed with us this long and didn't just take off after that part there. But tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and kind of how you got into the whole world of social selling.
Absolutely. I mean, we only had one round of dad jokes. If we had a second round, maybe it would have gone differently. But you know, there we go.
We squeaked it out.
So I started off as a sales development rep and cold calling, cold emailing, all the things that you all probably know about. And when I started that role about 5 months in, I decided to document that journey and started a YouTube channel called the SDR Chronicles. I did an episode every single day for about 7 months. And that's what helped elevate my brand on LinkedIn. And this was back in like 2016. So there was like no posting at all. And that led me to be a manager of 13 reps on the team. And then from there, I got approached by John Barrows to do sales training. I did that for about 3.5 years. I trained like Salesforce, Slack, Google, etc., all on top of the funnel strategies. And I took my love of content creation and just what I learned in that skill set. And now, as we're going to talk about today, helping B2B brands advance their buyer journey through videos and also through event activations. And how I believe that even though I've been in the game a long time, outbound is dying, but not dead. So don't get crazy, but dying. And this is ways that we could get better at it.
Wow. So you started as an SDR in the tech space.
Yep. Started as an SDR, cold calling, cold emailing. So, I know what the grind is like.
You know what, though? I want to make sure and pause for everybody. You guys know I like to do this. Morgan just said he documented his journey as an SDR. And now, Morgan, you have what, 155,000 followers on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
We talk a lot on the show about the power of content and about being consistent and about being authentic and sharing. And I think I just don't want to jump into the topic at hand without, taking a pause and reminding everybody, like, Morgan, you had just started out, right? You were young when you started as an SDR.
He's
and
still
what
young.
catapulted you was just documenting your journey and sharing authentically what you were learning, what you were going through, what challenges you had. Is that right?
That's accurate. Yes.
Yeah. So often we hear people say, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to comment. And Morgan, what would you say to that based on your experience?
Yeah, I'll give you the advice that I got because I just dove in. So I read an article by Ralph Barcy, and I always show him love on this, and it talked about how an SDR should start documenting their journey. I talked to him, and he was like, look, like, you're sharing a perspective that's unique because you're in the role. And even though you don't have like a CRO experience, you didn't exit a company, you don't have millions of dollars in revenue or whatever, you have the experience of an SDR, which most people may have not had. And also you're coming from that unique point of view because it's your story. So I took that to heart. And then what really took it to the next level was when I met Gary Vee at an event. It was about 4 or 5 months into my role. And I told him, hey, this is what I want to do. And he just was like, document, don't create. Like, if you just document it, then it's a credible source that you're coming from. So if you're documenting what's going on in your actual life, there's no one that can take that away from you because that's what you're actually doing. And people resonate with that and it becomes relatable.
That's really good. Thank you. Thank you for indulging me, guys. I just think there's always the opportunity for us to pause for people that are following the show. I know so often it's, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And imposter syndrome and all those things kick in. And what I heard you say, Morgan, is you documented your own journey.
Yep, exactly. Yep. And that was it.
And I think we should even consider a show on that. I mean, I think that's really, really an important point about documenting your own journey versus we talk a lot about posting. We don't necessarily talk about how do you document that journey and how would you go about it. I think we did that a couple of weeks back. I forget who but anyway, I know a couple of the guests back, we talked a little bit about that, but I think it's something more that we should.
Darren McKee.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's amazing to me. There's always, and I think as coaches and trainers, we got to remember this, but they're always like, what do I do? What do I do? How do I do it? And I think last week, even with Mandy, we talked a little bit about, just documenting what do you think, what do you observe, and what do you feel is a good way to start just on everything that's going on in front of you. But I just wanted to highlight, Morgan, you were tremendously successful at it. And what you said, you just simplify. You're like, I just documented my journey. That's all.
Yeah.
Question from Klaus as well. I'd love to hear Morgan's thoughts on Klaus's question because I think it's very poignant. When we talk about documenting, how do we do it? And I think there's a litany of ways. I'd love to hear Morgan's thoughts. Obviously he was producing videos. I will tell you, because we talk on the show all the time about how do you get started, and the posts and the blogs and the content that I get the most engagement on is when I'm able to tell a story from my past, win, lose, or draw, that relays an experience. And everybody listening, you all have a unique, vantage point and perspective and valuable experience. And if you share it and you welcome feedback, you will get meaningful engagement. But Morgan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you document?
Yeah, so I believe the mechanism of documentation is up to the person and the user. So what I mean by that is there are some people who are really good at writing. So maybe, for example, your documentation is like, I don't know, Reflection Friday. I'm making up something for you. So every Friday you reflect on what's happened during the week and you share that with the audience, right? For me, it was the video series, the SDR Chronicles, and I just made videos and talked about what was going on, right? That was the real key thing across the board. So I just think that when you're thinking about documenting anything, you have to think about the mechanism that you are good at. For me, it's creating videos. I've just seen across the 7 years of creating content on the platform, when I make a video, I can just speak to the audience, and that is what I'm the best at. So you just have to figure out what that looks like for you. But also, documenting doesn't even mean that you even have to share it on LinkedIn either. There's other ways to do it, right? You can document with your own self and maybe share with a select group of people in a community in a private message on LinkedIn. It doesn't always have to be public as well. So I'm not telling people you have to go public and go crazy with it.
I love that. I'll make one last thought on that. I keep a personal journal, which has been helpful when I've written my books. I'll keep a professional journal, which helps me when I'm writing my appraisals. And frankly, I'll transfuse both of them into posts. And when you talk about posts, the video content you can create can go any variety of places. I put the video content that I create on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and be willing to try new things. Some of them may not speak to you or work for you, but if you're willing to try some of these new things, you'll learn and you'll be exposed to new audiences.
That's so good. All right. Well, I sidetracked us a little bit, Morgan. Thanks for indulging us on a little bit of a path there, but our topic is a good one. And Tom, sorry, I don't want to derail us. Let's get back to the topic.
No. So let's go back to and let's dig in more into this whole buyer journey, because I know this is an area, Morgan, you're spending a lot of time with companies and helping companies. First of all, what when you work with a company or someone hires you, how do you explain to them how the buyer journey has changed? We talk a lot about that on this show, but what do you see and how do you explain it from your vantage point?
Yeah, so there's a study that came out from LinkedIn, and they said this is actually pretty wild. When I saw this, I was like, wait, what? 95% of people are not ready to buy what you have.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty crazy. 95% aren't ready. So, okay, you're doing all this outbound, you're calling, etc. And again, I'm a massive proponent of it because I've done all this stuff. But 95% aren't ready. All right. So there's 5% that are ready, and you probably are already talking to them, or maybe they're already working with someone else. So what I'm telling people is, how are you going to stay top of mind with these 95% of people? Just emailing them and cold calling is not going to cut it. You're going to have to do other things. And our belief at AMP is that it's through videos and it's through events. My take on this, you all can check me, the audience, y'all can be like, oh, I don't believe you. It doesn't really matter. But I'm just telling you what I believe is going to happen, is that the people are going to realize that, oh, I need to go to events. But I actually don't think people are going to go to the massive events as much as they used to. They're going to start doing these mini events. They're going to do their own customer events. They're going to do more dinners, but they're going to be more exclusive, etc. That's where the real conversations are going to happen, because you're able to not only build relationships, but you're able to build an emotional connection through an event. And I believe event activations and things of that nature will be a huge point of advancing people through the buyer journey. And it always has. I just think it'll be more on the forefront, and people are going to start being more creative with them. So that's what I'm telling clients is like, hey, look, what are you doing for the 95% that like aren't buying yet? Are you just going to let them go by the wayside? No, you got to get in front of those people.
Quick follow-up question to that, Morgan. The 5% that are in market, right? They're serious. They're really, looking for whatever you're selling. When you talk about videos, and I know we're going to dig into this more, but videos and events, are you trying to then reach sort of within that 95%, the curious or the people that are thinking about it, but aren't, the curious, not the serious? Or is it somebody that may have actually no awareness at all of what you're doing or what you're selling, but they may have a problem or an opportunity to be able to take advantage of?
I would say it's all of those components, because each piece of content you're creating covers those different segmentations. So each group of those people will get a different piece of content. right? So that's the key right there that then allows you to then get the most out of it, right? And so if I know at the end of the day that, okay, we have people that are, curious about serious, we have content for that. We also have to content to educate the market on what we're actually trying to accomplish if they're not educated already. So I believe it's components of all those pieces of content, but the difference becomes what is that company and then what is that market, and then we'll skew which content should be more important because it is different. Some people are like trying to build a whole new category, some people are like already in categories, so it just depends what you're selling.
Perfect. So as sellers then, and especially in outbound, right, which is what you've been, we're doing, if you're making cold calls and SDR, nonetheless, you're trying to market to a cold audience. What is, I guess, the mindset then that you need to be looking at things differently? Obviously, you have to be looking through the mindset. When you started, did you realize that 95% or more weren't in market, or was that something that you had to kind of get to come to grasp with?
I mean, to be fair, when you start off in sales, it feels like 99.99% of people aren't in market. So I'd actually would increase that percentage because everybody doesn't want to talk to you. But in all seriousness, no, it wasn't something I was thinking about at all. Like I didn't know these stats. I just knew that I had to make calls and go schedule meetings, and that I just needed to get better if people weren't interested, right? I didn't know that the buyers were continuously getting more and more educated. As I got more educated, I figured that out. So I would say as a seller, right, I think the things you have to focus on are like still do your thing, right? Make sure, right, that you can still do what you need to do at the end of the day as a seller and do these mechanisms. I'm just saying you have to think beyond that. So as a seller, are you talking to your marketing team on like what events are they doing? What virtual events are they doing? How is that important? Are you asking for highlights from those events so you can have timely follow-ups? These are things that are going to be important. I think it's an all-encompassing way to reach out to people. You can't just lean on just one mechanism to get that done. And that's what I'm talking about there.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out because at the end of the day, as a seller, you've got to look at your playing field and you've got to look at how you're engaging. What are the resources at your disposal? And what I love about what Morgan's articulated here is that because everything has changed and because the way that people are educating themselves, how they're educating themselves, why they're educating themselves, and what the impact of that education is, means that we've got to show up differently. We've got to meet them smarter with more value where they are and in a meaningful way that they're more viable to consume what we're putting in front of them. So having those kind of smaller, intimate, quick gatherings that are hard hitting, engaging, impactful and meaningful is one element. And then also doing some of these hybrid events. I'm seeing a lot of traction right now from doing broader webinars and scale motions because I have a very large territory.
Right.
And it helps me to reach out to some of these folks that, are in the 95%. That do what Morgan just pointed out. It helps us stay top of mind. They're not ready to buy right now. But guess what? I'm showing up armed with value and I'm showing them what we're all about and what we're doing, what other customers like them are doing that are helping them be successful so that they're armed with what's happening. And if they want to connect with other customers that are doing it, that helps. But also when they're ready to buy, we're in the sphere. And I think that's super important. And video has a higher propensity of being consumed by them, using that in our outreach, using that in our newsletters. I think that's the key element is we've got to be ready, willing, and able to tinker with how we're showing up with customers, incorporating all the resources, all the tools. It helps us scale, but it also helps us do those focused events better as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, I think with that, I agree with everything you guys said. And I think there's another layer deeper to it for teams. It doesn't have to be difficult, but I think it gets ignored a lot is helping the entire team use this content in the right way, in the right place, at the right time. If there's an initiative of, hey, we got all these videos and we have these webinars, that's great. But I think a lot of teams stop there. Like, okay, we have this webinar, go invite people. Well, there's a better way to build up to the webinar. There are sequences that we can put in place that lead somebody up to that webinar. When we understand the 95% are not in market, we speak to them differently, but too often we speak to all 100% of people the same way, which is they're in market right now and let's go capture them. And I think it's just that shift of how do we talk from a place of how we create demand instead of talking from a place or word or communicating in a way that is just trying to capture the little tiny bit of demand that might be there right now.
Exactly.
And there's a couple great questions I want to bring up here. I'm going to start with Jeff.
I like that question.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Oh,
Yeah.
Hoffman, what up, man?
And he's saying I think he's saying, isn't that a marketing motion? I believe what he's referring to is what we're talking about is creating demand and doing the things in that 95%. So his question is, are you guys advocating that this is now a sales motion to be out there creating demand, not just a marketing action? Morgan, what's your take on that?
Well, okay, it's a great question, and I think across the board, it depends on what mechanism you're talking about. Let me give you an example that most people consider a marketing motion, but it actually can be a sales motion. So let's go back to the 95%. So, okay, let's decide we want to create a podcast because we want to stay top of mind. We want people to know who we are, right? Cool. Here's one thing that like most people don't do. We do it with clients. We talk to people about this. I've done it myself. Is you have a target list of accounts. Most companies right now have a top 100, top 250, top 500, right? Your people are reaching out to those accounts and they're getting nowhere, right? So they're probably in the 95%, they probably don't really care. But how do we actually get in front of them so that at some point when they come 5%, they think of us? You should probably just invite them on the podcast. Because pseudo, if you think about it, a podcast is just a discovery conversation at the end of the day, right? And it allows you to get that pieces within that. So what I would do is I'd invite that executive and be, hey, yo, come on the, I mean, I wouldn't invite them with this, but you know what I mean? Hey, come on the podcast. What's up? Come on. Cool. We talk for 30, 45 minutes. We've built that connection. That's a one-to-one. I reach out to that one person, sales, right? And now we have that relationship. So moving forward, if something does come up, they're going to think about us. That is like an example of how that marketing motion of podcasting, which is a one-to-many, actually can become a one-to-one that most people just don't think about. They just try to get the most popular people and say we have a big podcast. That's great, but actually the podcast can be a revenue mechanism that most people don't use it for outside of sponsorship, which is most people, that's what I think about. You actually could use it to get business if you think about it appropriately. So that's one example. I mean, we could go over 1,000, but I think they work in tandem depending on how you want to go about it and how you look at it.
Yeah, I got a quick add-on, and then I want to get Morgan's thoughts on Kathy's question as well in the chat. The short answer, Jeff, is yes and yes. Because the reality is, yes, marketing needs to be engaged, but also there is an element of it that is squarely in a sales motion. And what I mean by that is, for instance, today I work hand in hand with marketing in my organization. And I know that I'm a bit of an anomaly when it comes to selling. But, we get marketing leads that are funneled to us, people that are engaging today with collateral, downloading white papers, et cetera. And I could go out as a seller and I could call 1, 2, 5, 10 of those people. And I could completely strike out. Or I could take the people that have opted into marketing and I could build a list and build a community around these folks. And I can reach out very strategically to certain people based on what I see happening in the marketplace, what that organization is doing, what their earnings report says, et cetera. So that's what I've chosen to do. And because of that, I have 7,000 leads within some of these organizations that I support in my territory. And I'll use those strategically to invite them to events. I've been doing my own homegrown events for years. I'll use marketing collateral and I'll use marketing resources in order to promote some of these, but it helps sales and marketing work in tandem and hand in hand to have the best of both worlds. I encourage sales and marketing to work closely together because at the end of the day, marketing needs to know what sales needs, but also sales needs to be driving these motions because we're in the field, we're on the front lines. We know what the customer needs, or at least we should.
Yeah, and I want to bring up this other question here from Kathy. Let me back up here. Kathy, brings up a good point. Buyers were never taught to be buyers. Do you feel that this is an outdated mindset now because of videos, podcasts, and so forth? In other words, do buyers really need to be taught to be buyers, or are they doing a good job of being buyers and doing their homework and stuff? I definitely have a take on this, but Morgan, interested in your thought on this.
Now I need to know what your take is. So it's two things. So one is there are educated buyers, right? And then there are like non-educated buyers based on what they're buying, right? So for example, the seller is selling this product almost every single day. A buyer might buy this maybe once or twice a year. However, they're educated buyers who have been in the space long enough and they actually know what to do. So it's actually up to the due diligence of the sales rep to understand, is this an educated buyer or not? It's been my belief. Other people could disagree, but that's like my take on it. I think the second thing though is it's a little bit different. It's like buyers don't know how to be good internal sellers. and you have to actually enable the buyer to be a good to actually help them sell internally. So that's actually what it is. Like, if something is too complicated or it doesn't make sense, the buyer has too many things going on, so they're going to move on. So it's actually up to the sellers to enable their buyer to sell internally so that they can be those champions internally as well. And you have to equip them to do the right things. That's why you have to do the right process and things of that nature. So that's the way that I personally think about it. People may be different, but now I got to hear your take. If you're like, oh, Morgan, you're wrong.
Well, it's very similar. No, it's very similar because we talk a lot about the buyer being in control of their own journey, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
But I have seen over and over and over that buyers can make that journey super complex. As complexity starts to go up, risk and perceived risk goes up. And then you get to a point where nothing happens or no decisions made. So I think to your point, Morgan, you're right on. We have to help the buyer through that process in a way that doesn't become so complex and go down so many rabbit holes and take forever that it becomes a no decision or such a perceived risky decision that nothing actually happens. So I think our role is not just to educate, but it's to educate on the process, which I think you stated very well.
And that leads into what we're talking about, using video, using shows, whether it's a podcast, it's a live show. I mean, we've seen this, is that the consistency of this type of content, being in front of people consistently, having conversations around these topics, it creates a trust. It creates a ongoing conversation that they're in. Even if people on the show, we don't really know that they're in these conversations because they haven't raised their hand or called us or emailed or said, let's talk yet. These types of shows are so important for laying that foundation, differentiating from your competitors, and solidifying that emotional connection and trust that you can't do any other way, and it doesn't come quickly. I think that's, for me, the power of video and events and shows like this, that companies that aren't doing it are just missing out on huge opportunity.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Yeah, I think buyers are coming at it from a place where they're scared to make the wrong decision. And I loved what Morgan said. We've got to put the buyer in the position to win. We've got to arm them with what they're going to need to sell internally. But we also have to understand that stakeholder map, because, ultimately we need to be to the right buyer. And frankly, there could be 5+ influencers that are a part of the ultimate buying decision, and we can't rely on the buyer to do our job. That's what I see far too often that we do. Buyers aren't necessarily trained in the right way either, trained to be buyers. Right. But at the end of the day, often they're not married to status quo. They just won't make a call because we haven't made the risk. We haven't de-risked the decision enough, and they don't want to be the zero. They want to be the hero.
Yeah, and I want to go back here real quick to a comment that Bob made, because I think it really sums up everything we've been talking about so far. Is traditional outbound motions have been geared toward finding existing demand, right? You could call it looking for the needle in the haystack, as you said, Morgan, right? Because 99.9% may be there. But the new outbound paradigm is to create demand. And I think actually that's everything we talk about on this show related to social selling, is how do you use social to go out and create demand to the other 95 or 99% that's there. And if you look at it from that mindset, I think outbound becomes a lot more fun, but more, in addition to being a lot more fun, a lot more effective.
I agree.
Tom, we lost you there for a second.
I think you lost him there.
Okay, am I back?
You're good. You're good. You're good.
Okay. I said something brilliant there, but
yeah.
That's all right. We'll move on here.
That's good.
I think there's another question here from Alexandra, and I think, Carson, it's related to something you mentioned about community. Do you want to just touch on that a little bit? Like, when you use the word community, what does it mean in that context?
No doubt. So there's common threads, right, with customers that you work with. I work today with med device, med tech organizations. There are a lot of them that do not compete with one another. There are scenarios where a lot of us may compete with customers that we have, or there may be competitive elements, but there may also be elements where it makes sense for partnership, collaboration, consortiums. And if I can be an enabler of organizations that I support working together, it can be to everyone's advantage. And sometimes that's the biggest value that I bring is I may have this relationship. You may not be ready to buy from me today. You may not be ready to buy from me today, but if I can put people together and foster collaboration that my organization can be a part of, they can all be a part of, there can be mutual gains. And so it's planting the seed for mutual benefit, but it's really just building community around commonalities. A lot of our organizations have common missions, common things that we want to achieve. And so by putting people together, sharing best practices, sharing what's working, and introducing customers to each other, some great results can happen.
Yeah, totally agree. Brandon, I wanted you to get your take on Klaus's question here as,
Yeah. Yeah. So I love that book. In fact, my history with influence goes back to 1991. My senior year of college, my thesis was based on that book. And I think reciprocity is a really interesting concept in there, and it's evolved in the 30 some years since I first dove into it. But look, I think reciprocity gets, as a term and as a strategy, gets used differently. I see a lot of emails that come in that people want to buy me lunch and they'll send me a gift card. And there's a thought that if we buy people lunch, we send them swag, we, buy them a beer, we take them golfing, we go to a ball game, anything like that, that there's a reciprocity effect. I think in this more virtual world and as busy as buyers are, that reciprocity can be used more by providing value, being a source, a trusted source of their research and their information. Carson talks about doing his webinars, and he gets a lot of people that show up. And if, as we've talked about, 95% aren't in market in it, why are that many people showing up? Well, because they trust Carson, they see him as a guide, they see him as that trusted advisor, and they're preparing knowing that sometime in the future, I might need to make a decision. And so I'm going to keep going to Carson to learn. I think that approach to reciprocity is more important now than some of the swag stuff. I mean, look, nobody's going to complain. We take them out and have a drink, or you take them out golfing, or whatever it is that they're into. It's going to be valuable as well. But I think in this time, people are so busy that reciprocity has to be much more tactical and has to add much more value than just going out and having fun.
Yeah, what's your guys' take on that?
I have nothing to add because I think you said it so well. So I don't want to add more to what y'all would already say. It's the same thing.
Yeah, perfectly said.
All right, Brandon, you it was a mic drop.
Yeah.
Let's go. All right. One more question I wanted to hit on here, and then I really want to get on to talking about some things as we look into 2024. But just kind of a follow-up question from Bob. He says, we were talking about marketing and sales. Do you think it's important to coordinate with marketing to sync up on messaging as you kind of put together your content or your strategy, or is there really different types of messaging? What's your take on that? Morgan, what would you recommend?
So the answer is yes, but not in the way that you think. So the seller should not go to marketing for the exact messaging. That's going to be a failure. I've seen it happen way too many times in all the trainings I've done. I just haven't seen it pan out. I'm not like hating on marketing. It just doesn't work. What you need to do though, is you need to figure out their messaging so that you can complement it. So whatever messaging that they have going out is your air cover, right, for the sales team. The sales team has to figure out how to contextualize the messaging that you have. I actually believe for most people that create videos, you shouldn't even have really a script. This is just my take on even training on this, is that it should just be a framework of bullet points of like how you deliver. You do an intro, you have your value prop, you find a contextual point, you do the call to action, right? And then you say how you say it. The videos are really about their personality at the end of the day. And even if you think about social media outreach, you can also send videos on there too. So we could put them in the same bucket. But I do believe that you have to make sure that you train your team on the frameworks, how to keep your video concise. You want to keep it to like 45 to 60 seconds, and you want to make sure it complements the messaging that marketing has. If you aren't complementing each other, that leads to the dissension that you don't want. But I wouldn't say replicate your marketing messaging into your sales messaging, because then that's not going to be helpful for you at all.
Marketing tends to broadcast. And as salespeople, we need to communicate. We need to be in a conversation. And that's straight marketing content. I mean, I haven't found a team yet, not to bash on marketers, that really understands the depth of what sales needs to create conversation. Marketing still just comes from that end. Like, we broadcast, we tell people who we are and what we do. And those aren't good conversation starters.
No, I think in a perfect scenario, sales is going to do everything they can to, really earn trust from marketing and the desire to work hand in hand, arm me with what I may need in order to, brandish that message that ultimately goes out to the customer or ultimately goes into that post, and trust sales in order to go out and kind of create some of that element. But certainly neither party can have carte blanche in what the other one does. You've got to work hand in hand. I've worked with some great marketing folks over the years. And, in every scenario, there's been times where they've relied on me to do some elements of their job because they know I do it well, and vice versa. So I think that's the kind of harmonious relationship you ultimately want to go after.
Makes total sense. So I want to touch on one more thing related to events before we kind of look ahead to some strategies for 2024. Morgan, you've found success and you're finding success with live events, not just virtual events. And how do you believe that should kind of fit into a playbook? And can it fit into a sales playbook? I think it ties into what we were just talking about marketing, or does it have to be done with marketing, or could it be done in a live event? And what could a live event look like?
So there's a multitude of different live events, right? So there's one where it's like you bought a booth and you're going there, right? So that can live event. The other thing is your own live event, like you do a customer event, and then you have like a mini event within a big event as well, right? So there's a ton of different events that you can do, but let's just stick to like one that most people can correlate to, which is like the booth. Now, I think the booth is probably one of the biggest wastes of money for most organizations because they don't do that much with it. And like, I've been to a lot of conferences. I've seen what y'all do at booths. I don't know what y'all are doing. I'll be very transparent. You have your sales reps just chilling, hanging out. That's not helpful. Every swag item is pretty much standard. Like, okay, you got a coffee mug, a shirt, and like a pen. Like, it's nothing special. And there's nothing to actually get people excited to go there. And when people do go there and hang out, the questions are very standard and it's not helpful. So the whole thing's typically normally a waste because you didn't really do whole much. And then, I'm not going around on this, but like, and then people just scan your badge and have no context on why they're scanning the badge because they have to hit a quota of scanned badges. That whole model is messed up. So the thing is, if you look at live events, you should actually be trying to get some ROI from it. People spend $50, $80 to $100,000, $200,000 on these booths. And I just seen them just hang out. Like, I do not get it. So the thing is, marketing has to play here, and marketing needs to come in and be like every marketing team should go in every single booth and be like, how can we be the most attractive, appealing, explosive booth at this entire conference? You want to be able to, like, you are literally have so many people at your booth, the other booths are getting upset. That should be the mindset that marketers should have. I don't know what's going on in these meetings. I'm not in them, but I see the booths. That's not the energy, right? Like, you need to come in and be like, we're going to dominate this show. Like, that should be your mindset. Most people are just like, we're just here and we're existing. And that's not going to win moving forward. So when you do that, right, it's like, what's that creative thing that's going to help us? Then the second piece is, how do we equip our sales reps to be everywhere? I'm going to tell you I was an SDR. I was 4 months into my role. My other friend was 3 months into his role. At that event, we went to every single booth that was a sponsor and we told them what we did. And we said, if somebody mentions something that we can help around this realm, send them to us. We went to every single booth and talked to every single person. I don't even think anyone does this anymore, by the way. So we did that, and then we were crazy. We had a hit list. So we printed out the pictures of the people we were trying to get in front of. So we'd be like, oh, wait, that's that person. And we go find them, right, and talk to them. And we would have the pictures ready on hand. I don't think people are going out like this. But my thing is, you have to train your team to dominate the event and the live events, because when you meet someone in person, whatever cold call or cold email or thing that you sent out, they completely forget it. They become a completely different person. And it was eye-opening to me because I had only been making calls and emails. When I met someone I had been trying to talk to, they were like super cool, and I was like, why aren't you cool when we were on a cold call? Like, you like told me that I should kill myself. Now you're chopping it up with me and we're having a normal conversation. So I think people really need to take action on how do they get people to their booth. So you have to amplify the booth, right? And then how do you teach your team, your sales team, to acquire those customers and that traffic? And then how do you get people to advocate and say that was the best booth I've ever seen?
Yep.
If you come in with the game plan that every single time, that's going to win it. And we're working on that right now. We'll have a couple activations to do next month, and that's what we're telling clients. Like, this is what we want you to do. We want you to walk out and have the best booth. Because if you don't have that mindset, I just don't know why you're going to the conference, to be fair.
That is exceptionally powerful. And I heard 3 common themes that I align with wholeheartedly. Number 1, make your booth a destination. And kind of 1B or 2 is arrange customer meetings at that booth. Have people converging on your booth. We did a really successful event earlier in the year, and that's exactly what it was. We are very selective in where we invest in these events. And we did one, and we showed up big, and our competition showed up really weak. It was actually comical to walk around and see how small of a presence and how ghost townish their presences were, and ours was booming. But we had people converging very intentionally. We were proactively reaching out in advance of this, inviting people to come to the booth. So it was bustling. And then the third element, and Morgan kind of touched on this, have that plan for engagement and follow-up. Making sure that we are following up on that event and that we're making sure that we get that ROI. Coming out of that event, we've got to make sure that, maybe we added them as a LinkedIn connection while we were standing there, talking to each other at the booth. Maybe we follow up with them on something very specific that we discuss at the booth. But I couldn't agree more. And the last thing I would say, just on events in general, and the reason that live events are so great is because they bring people together. And the more that you can bring multiple customers together, introduce them to each other, be strategic about this. I've got this customer who bought this from me last year, and I've got this customer who I want to sell something to this year, and I get them kind of talking. That's got a heck of a lot more viability in working than me just trying to sell something to this person. Try to, have that swarm mentality, put people together, be an enabler, be an orchestrator, be a broker of relationships and dialogue. And those are the events that really win.
Yeah, I have a bit of a booth hack, I guess you would call it, that we have
There you
found work really well. And I think it ties into everything we've talked about is go and set up, especially if you've got a little bit of a bigger booth, but even if you've got a small 10 by 10, it'll work, is do interviews in the booth. So set up a tripod and bring in your customers or your prospects or your partners and do interviews right there in the booth. And just like you were just talking about, a few minutes ago about interviewing your customer or prospect on your podcast, do it in the booth. And, as Kathy was just saying, invite your best customers there and let them, do that for well. But if you do that, now you have video you can share with those prospects after the show. People love that. And then kind of the booth hack that we found was go ahead and then put them on Facebook or LinkedIn and geo-target do a paid media spend on it and geo-target people who are in the vicinity of the show. Like, target people within a mile of that. And then people are sitting in line looking at stuff, and all of a sudden your video shows up on their Facebook feed or on their, and it will drive people to the booth. It's amazing if done right, the number of people will go, I just had to come over and find out about this because I saw you on Facebook. And we found it to be a really, really good way to kind of do a booth hack to get more people there.
I got a final thought on this that goes back to the community comment earlier. This is why it's important that, I cultivate my community and I cultivate my list, and I've got my leads that have opted into marketing, because even if they don't respond when I reach out to them the first time or when I send them a newsletter, they're not, sending me a request to meet. When I'm doing an event that may be important to them or meaningful to them or in their geography, now I've got them and I can engage them and invite them to this and invite them out. And that ultimately might be what brings them to the table. I had a long sales cycle once that it took me 3 years to get in and get this deal landed. I invited this customer to multiple things, but eventually we met in person at an event, and it ended up within 6 months, we had a deal done.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So final question here for you, Morgan, as we look ahead to 2024, what do you think the most important thing a sales, and Carson, I want all of us to answer this if we can. What do we think the most important thing a sales organization can do and be thinking about? I think we're going to be starting Q4 here in another couple of days, between now and 2024? What should we be thinking about, and what should we be preparing for to really get the most out of 2024?
So I think there's a lot of ways to different answer this. I know even Patricia was talking about like your strategic plan, and depending on the business, right? You might have different optics. I think the most important thing that you should focus on is, instead of saying how do we enhance our sales cycle, and I was talking to like my old CRO about this, and like I just love the way that he phrased it. It's just like we should think about the buying stages and how the buyer goes through each stage, right, in the journey. So it's like, how can we get better at the buyer's journey? And what are things that we could do to enhance that, remove, right, whatever that may be. So from the top to the middle to the bottom, how can we get better at these things? Do we add different experiences? Is there an experiment that we can do? Is there something more advanced that we can be doing? I think if people go into 2024 and understand that, they're going to be able to acquire those net new customers and also acquire people that are on upsells or whatever they may be.
Perfect. Carson, what's your thought?
There is no 2024. That's like looking at next week's opponent. I'm totally kidding. Totally kidding. Here's the interesting thing, and I tell my team this all the time. If you're going to be, everything that you're going to sell into 2024, those conversations should be starting right now. Those seeds are being planted right now. So I always ask my team, what are the relationships that you're going to need in order to do what you want to do next year? Because we need to be going out right now and earning those relationships and starting those conversations. Because to Morgan's point, throughout this show, 95% of them aren't going to be necessarily ready to buy today. So we've got to, nurture and onboard them into at least being in our sphere. The other element is, what are the mediums that are going to be at our disposal in order to establish leads, earn conversations, build community, and these mechanisms for outreach? And so we've touched on a lot of them in here today. Videos don't happen overnight. Events don't happen overnight. These things take some element, some degree of planning, and we've got to really build a foundation. When I prepare for a new year, which I just did because our fiscal year started in July, I spent a lot of time studying. I studied the past year. What worked that I need to double down on? We realize we're beholden to a lot of built-in compelling events. Outside of that, we've got to create new compelling events, and we got to figure out the white space and what is, maybe the next viable consumable workload that we may be able to go after. And that's ultimately how I've got to build my plan. But I've also got to be very intentional and look at the things that didn't work. And I've got to jettison them, whether I liked them or not, or I've got to tweak them and make them work if there's some merit and validity. But you've got to really understand, take the time. I always like to say, before you can feast, you've got to set the table. So take the time to really build the foundation for what is going to be meaningful next year. What have you learned? What have you learned from this year? From the wins, what worked? What made those wins? From the losses, why did you lose? Are there things that you can tweak in your process? Was there a gotcha or an aha moment where you didn't have the key decision maker or the buyer or the stakeholder? And then change your process accordingly. But it's very intentional discipline and focus around people and process. Do you have the right relationships that you need? Do you have the right resources that you need? And can you fine tune your process in a way that will make you better next year?
Perfect.
Man, that's a lot of stuff for me to follow.
People, process, resources.
There you go. Hey, and what I would add to it is focus on creating a movement. And what I mean by that is let's have a mission that's bigger than just go sell more. And events are a big part of the way of doing that. When people, when our customers, when our community, our prospective community feels like they're more involved in this process and they're learning with us, they're part of something that's moving, not just being passive and waiting for us to ask them if they want to buy something, then it makes our selling job a lot easier because they've got more trust and they're willing to go on a bit of a journey with us. But we've got to create that movement. We got to create the journey for them to want to go on the journey with us. And I think that leads into the mindset of how do we go about creating demand instead of just capturing demand. I agree with what Morgan said at the beginning is those top of funnel outbound activities that are cold email, cold calling and all that. They're just, I don't like to say they're dead, but they're definitely not as effective as they were and losing efficacy every week. And then I think that the last key thing is, and taking this from Tom's book, so kudos to Tom. I found that when we approach that yellow brick road mindset and ask ourselves, what are the three things that our buyers truly need to understand and the three things they truly need to believe in order to demand our product? When we start there, it's the right change and influence on our content strategy. It changes the way we speak to them. It changes the content we create. It changes the way that we engage them. So I think that mindset of three things they need to understand, three things they need to believe or have to believe to demand my product changes the game dramatically. And I think this is essential as we move into 2024, or really anything in the future, because the noise is getting louder. AI is going to make the noise even louder and more of it. And we've got to figure out how the heck to stand out.
Totally agree. And I'll answer my take because I want to use Jeff's question to answer for my answer. Jeff's asking would love to hear what you guys learned that doesn't work. And I think going back full circle, Morgan, the way you started this is most companies now invest most of their marketing dollars and their sales emphasis on that 5%. They're all going after, I would say probably 80% of the marketing budget is going after, or
Right.
even the sales budget, right? An SDR, that's a pretty expensive sales budget, is going after that 5%. And very little is going into that 95%. That doesn't work, right? It doesn't work in a lot of ways. I mean, if you look at tech companies now and how much money they burned, and it's hard to get money if you're a startup or a early stage tech company, you've got to be way more efficient with your sales motions. So I think what isn't working is focusing on the capture. What you do need to be thinking about for 2024, which we've all been saying, is how do you go about creating the demand? And you do that by understanding that buyer journey, by understanding their three understandings and their three beliefs. I think those are the two things that come together. Carson, anything you want to add on what doesn't work?
Yeah, and actually, I love that you framed it up within the context of what Morgan's talked about here today, because that is crucial. And frankly, that is how an anomalous enterprise seller like me managed to be successful, because I was always focusing on the 95%. How can we nurture them along the way? And how I did that is not talking about what I want to talk about, showing up and throwing up with just all the random marketing messages and thinking that that was going to entice somebody to want to talk to me. No, that doesn't work. What does work is showing up, talking very specifically, very short and succinctly about what they want to talk about, and figuring out those key elements and enticing them to the conversation based about what matters to them. I realized for me, that is being able to offer price predictability, or demystifying what my company can do for them, or how do we partner together or sell together in the market, or how can we partner around generative AI. I can get a lot of conversations based on that. Frankly, also not getting caught up in all the fire drills. I have to block not intentional, non-negotiable time every morning where I map out my day and I go down my list, and that begets number 3, which is going after everything. Where I failed at first was trying to go after absolutely everything. Chasing that $20,000 deal the same I was chasing the $1 million deal, and you just can't do that. You've got to find ways to be very focused and disciplined, and also to effectively scale. A lot of us work with broader teams, and that enables us to do that. But finding ways to do that, and prioritization around impact and tangible outcomes. And if you do it that way, you can be a lot more successful. And just look at where you're getting paid and where you're not. What are the non-revenue generating activities that I did last year that I need to get rid of? And where are the things that I spend a lot of time? Did they have outcomes that generated revenue? If they didn't, that's a pretty clear indicator that maybe it's time to go.
Yeah, great point. Well, Morgan, it's clear why you're a 4-time LinkedIn sales voice. Really great insights today. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. We appreciate you joining us for sure. I assume if people want to learn more about you, they'll find you on LinkedIn, of course. Anywhere else you'd like to send them?
Yeah, so gonna start ramping up more video content. So if you want to check me out there, it's just Morgan J. Ingram on YouTube. So gonna start doing more interactive videos and talking about all the stuff we talked about today, even in more depth and more length, etc. But obviously LinkedIn, and yeah, appreciate everybody tuning in with some great questions, and maybe we run it back. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll definitely will. All right, Brandon, Carson, any final thoughts?
No, it was a
No.
great show. I think there's a lot there that I encourage people to grab one thing and kind of run with it if you can. And I mean, it's hard because we talk across marketing and sales, and maybe you don't have that kind of power in your company. But I mean, if you're C-suite or your leadership, and you're tired of beating your head on the wall, or you're tired of seeing that the cold outreach isn't doing what you hope it can do, it's time to get courageous and really make some change of what you've done over the last 10 to 15 years. It sucks. It is what it is, but it's time to have courage to make change.
Yep. Well, thank you for all the kind comments coming through. If you haven't, please go download our podcast, leave us a rating. We're trying to get to #1 on Apple. We keep kind of back and forth. Some days we're #1, some days we're #2
Not
with
a bad
social
place to be.
selling, but yeah, could be
Going back
worse.
and forth, you know.
Yeah. So anyway, please go on, leave us a rating if you could, or a review. We would love it. And Carson, we've missed it the last few weeks. We haven't had anybody to kind of take us home, but take us home here.
Yeah, I'm going to close with a final thought too. And my biggest takeaway, what inspires me about Morgan, frankly, is this is a several year journey for him. He talks about starting out doing this in 2016 and really taking the initiative to document what he did. And the things that he's done, these are things that we can all learn from and do ourselves. And I think that's the great takeaway. He's established a brand and a following because he loves his craft and he's passionate about it and he's always learning. And he puts himself out there. And so I think there's a great takeaway for all of us in that, is that document your journey, even if it's for your eyes only. That's my movie reference of the day for those of you paying attention. Even if it's just for you to go back and learn from where you've been, there is so much value in that. And I love the fact that Morgan has also pivoted throughout his journey. He's realized what has worked, what hasn't worked, what has changed, and how can he change his focus in order to really continue to hone his craft. And that's something that we can all learn from. So until next time, everyone, thanks for being on with Social Selling 2.0. Happy social selling.